The glint of morning sunlight on her dagger was the last thing Preacher Holloway saw before Lillian Dawson fled the small white chapel, her younger sister's hand clasped tightly in hers. The Nevada Territory of 1876 was unforgiving to women without protection, but staying meant certain death or worse. "Hurry, Hannah," Lillian urged, her dark hair spilling from beneath her bonnet as they raced through the outskirts of Las Vegas, Nevada. At 22, Lillian had endured 4 months of unwanted advances from the town's revered preacher, a man who wore the cloth by day and revealed his true nature behind closed doors. Her 18-year-old sister stumbled behind her, carrying their hastily packed satchel. "Lil, he'll come after us," Hannah panted, her blue eyes wide with fear. "He said I know what he said." Lillian's voice was steel despite the terror clawing at her throat. "But I'd rather die under the open sky than let that man touch either of us again." The sisters had been orphaned last winter when influenza took their parents within days of each other. With nowhere else to go, they'd accepted Preacher Holloway's offer to work as housekeepers in the church in exchange for room and board. The arrangement had seemed a blessing until the preacher's lingering glances turned to wandering hands, and his scripture readings at dinner became thinly veiled threats. Last night, he'd cornered Lillian in the kitchen, his whiskey-soured breath hot against her face as he proposed a sinful arrangement become his secret bride, or watch her sister be sent to the brothel to pay their increasing debt to him. When Lillian refused, his hand had struck her cheek with such force that she'd crashed against the stove, burning her forearm on the hot iron. That was when she knew they had to flee. Now, as they scrambled down the steep embankment toward Meadow Creek, Lillian could hear distant shouting. The town was waking, and soon the preacher would discover them missing, along with the church's petty cash and his prized dagger, a small fortune she'd been forced to steal to secure their escape. "We'll follow the creek south," Lillian instructed, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. Spring thaw had turned the normally placid stream into a churning ribbon of mountain runoff. "There's an abandoned mining settlement near Good Springs. We can hide there until—" Hannah's scream cut through the air as her foot slipped on the muddy bank. She tumbled forward, the satchel flying from her grasp and landing in the swift current. "No." Lillian lunged for the bag, nearly falling in herself. Everything they owned, their mother's locket, their father's pocket watch, the stolen money, disappeared downstream in seconds. Despair crashed over her like the creek's icy water. Without supplies, their chances of survival in the desert were slim. Hannah began to sob, her shoulders shaking as she knelt in the mud. "Looks like you ladies could use some help," a deep voice called from across the creek. Lillian whipped around, instinctively pushing Hannah behind her and reaching for the stolen dagger at her waist. Through the early morning mist rising off the water, she saw him, a tall figure astride a chestnut stallion. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that seemed to assess their desperate situation in an instant. "Stay back," Lillian warned, brandishing the dagger. "We want no trouble." The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. As he stepped closer to the creek's edge, sunlight illuminated his features. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25. With sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the whiskey her father once favored. "Name's Wade Porter," he said, removing his hat and offering a slight bow that seemed strangely formal for a man dressed in trail-worn clothes. "And I'd reckon you're running from something mighty frightening to be out here alone, threatening a stranger with a blade that fancy." Lillian didn't lower the dagger. "Our circumstances are none of your concern, Mr. Porter. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps not, but I've got provisions to spare, and it looks like yours just took a swim." He gestured downstream where their satchel had disappeared. "I'm headed south myself. Might be safer traveling together." "How do we know you're not worse than what we're running from?" Hannah whispered from behind Lillian. Wade Porter's expression sobered. "You don't. But I give you my word as a gentleman that I mean no harm. My mother raised me better than that." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a canteen, tossing it across the narrow portion of the creek where rocks created a natural bridge. Lillian caught it with her free hand. "There's fresh water inside. I've got food, blankets, and an extra horse about 100 yards back with my camp. You're welcome to share in what I have, no strings attached, or you can continue on your way." "Your choice, miss." "Dawson," Lillian replied cautiously. "Lillian Dawson. This is my sister Hannah." Wade nodded. "Miss Dawson, the way I see it, you've got a man tracking you likely that new preacher folks in town have been raving about." At Lillian's startled expression, he continued, "Small communities talk, and that dagger you're holding belongs to Holloway. I recognize the silver cross on the hilt." Lillian's heart pounded. "Are you planning to turn us in?" Wade's laugh was unexpected, warm, and genuine. "Madam, I've no love for men who hide behind scripture while behaving like devils. Now, there's a crossing about 50 feet upstream where you and your sister can get across without getting soaked. I suggest we make haste before the good preacher organizes a search party." Hannah tugged at Lillian's sleeve. "Lil, I think we should trust him. We have nothing left." Lillian studied Wade Porter's face, searching for deceit and finding only open concern. Every instinct screamed caution, but the sound of distant horses sealed her decision. "Lead the way, Mr. Porter." The sun climbed higher as Wade guided them upstream to a series of flat stones that formed a natural path across the creek. He offered his hand to each sister in turn, steadying them as they crossed. His touch was firm but respectful, and he released Lillian's hand the moment her feet touched the opposite bank. "My camp's this way," he said, gesturing toward a stand of cottonwood trees. "I was planning to head out at first light, but I reckon fate had other plans." Following him through the trees, Lillian was surprised to find a well-ordered camp. A small fire burned low, coffee bubbling in a battered pot. Nearby, a second horse, a dappled mare, was tethered beside Wade's stallion. Various supplies were neatly arranged: bedrolls, saddlebags, cooking implements, and a rifle resting within easy reach. "You weren't lying about the provisions," Hannah remarked, eyeing the food laid out for what would have been Wade's breakfast. "Never saw much point in lying," he replied, handing them each a tin cup of coffee. "Creates more trouble than it solves." As they drank the hot, bitter brew, Lillian observed Wade more carefully. He moved with the economy of motion she'd seen in experienced cowboys, but his speech was more educated than most ranch hands. His clothes, though dusty from the trail, were of good quality. "You're not just passing through," she stated rather than asked. "You know too much about the town." Wade nodded as he packed up his belongings with swift efficiency. "Spent some time in Las Vegas last year. Worked at the Peterson Ranch until the drought hit and they had to let hands go. I've been working my way south since then, taking odd jobs. Where are you headed now?" Hannah asked, helping to roll up a blanket without being asked. "Silver Creek. Small settlement about 3 days' ride from here. Got word they need experienced men for a cattle drive to California." He glanced at Lillian. "I could escort you ladies there. Town's got a decent hotel, telegraph office, even a lady doctor who might tend to that burn on your arm." Lillian instinctively covered her injured forearm. She hadn't realized it was visible beneath her sleeve. "And what would you want in return, Mr. Porter?" His eyes met hers directly. "Nothing you're not willing to give, Miss Dawson. Company on the trail, perhaps. Conversation. Been riding alone too long." A man alone in the wilderness seeking only conversation seemed unlikely, but something in his steady gaze convinced Lillian he was telling the truth, at least for now. "Very well. We accept your offer to Silver Creek." She straightened her shoulders. "But I want to make our terms clear. We'll share duties and expenses as we're able, but my sister and I are under no obligation to you beyond basic courtesy." Wade's lips curved into a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Understood, Miss Dawson. Now can either of you ride?" Hannah stepped forward. "Our father taught us both. I'm quite good, actually." "Excellent." Wade gestured to the dappled mare. "This is Pepper. She's gentle but sure-footed." "Hannah, you'll ride her. Miss Dawson, if you don't mind sharing Rusty with me for now, we'll make better time. Once we're further from town, we can trade off." As Wade helped Hannah mount Pepper, Lillian took stock of their situation. Hours ago, she'd been trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Now she was placing her trust in a stranger who might prove more dangerous than the preacher. Yet something told her Wade Porter was different. There was a steadiness to him that calmed her frayed nerves. "We should leave some false tracks," Wade said, interrupting her thoughts. "Make it look like you headed west toward California instead of south." "You've done this before," Lillian observed. "Helped people escape." Wade's expression grew distant. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to need a fresh start." He extinguished the fire with dirt, erasing all evidence of their presence. "Time to ride. Preacher will have men searching every direction by noon." Within minutes, the camp was packed, and Wade was helping Lillian mount his stallion before swinging up behind her. The sudden proximity to him, his chest warm against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins, made her stiffen. "I'll keep my distance as much as possible, Miss Dawson," he said quietly, sensing her discomfort. "But we need to make good time until we're clear of the preacher's reach." Lillian nodded, forcing herself to relax. This arrangement was temporary, necessary for survival. Nothing more. As they set off, Wade led them first west along the creek, deliberately leaving obvious tracks. After a mile, they crossed the water and doubled back through rocky terrain where they would leave minimal trace, eventually turning south toward Silver Creek. Hannah rode alongside them, her face brightening as she bonded with the gentle mare. It was the first time Lillian had seen her sister smile since their parents' death. "Mr. Porter," Hannah called, "how did you come to have two horses if you travel alone?" "The mare belonged to my trail partner, Jack," Wade explained. "He took fever 3 weeks back in a small settlement north of here. Doctor did what he could, but—" he shook his head. "Jack asked me to see Pepper was looked after. Been meaning to sell her in Silver Creek, but having her has come in handy today." "I'm sorry about your friend," Hannah said softly. Wade nodded his thanks. "Life out here is often short. Makes it important to do right by people while you can." As they rode, the landscape changed from creek-fed greenery to the stark beauty of the Nevada desert. Heat shimmered on the horizon, and Lillian was grateful for the wide-brimmed hat Wade had insisted she wear. By midday, Las Vegas was far behind them, but Wade maintained a steady pace, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "There's a small spring about an hour ahead," he said. "We'll water the horses and rest there briefly." Lillian nodded, acutely aware of his proximity. Despite the circumstances, she couldn't deny Wade Porter was a handsome man, and his gentle treatment of Hannah had softened her wariness. Still, trust came slowly after what they'd endured. "May I ask what happened?" Wade's voice was low near her ear. "With the preacher, I mean. Towns seem to think highly of him." Lillian hesitated. "Towns often see what they want to see in men of the cloth, true enough." He offered us shelter after our parents died, she continued reluctantly, then demanded payment of a sort I wasn't willing to provide. Wade's body tensed behind her. I see. When I refused, he threatened Hannah, said he'd send her to work off our debt at Miss Clara's establishment. The infamous brothel on the edge of town needed no further explanation. No wonder you ran, Wade said, his voice tight with controlled anger. What you did took courage, Miss Dawson. It wasn't courage, Lillian replied. It was desperation. Sometimes they are the same thing. His arms shifted as he adjusted the reins. For what it's worth, I believe you made the right choice. Some men aren't fit to preach the word, let alone enforce it. They lapsed into silence as they rode, the rhythmic movement of the horse and the vastness of the desert strangely soothing. For the first time in months, Lillian felt the iron grip of fear loosen around her heart. They weren't safe not by any measure, but they were free. For now, that would have to be enough. The spring Wade mentioned proved to be a small oasis nestled between rocky outcroppings. Clear water bubbled from the ground, creating a shallow pool surrounded by surprisingly lush vegetation, before disappearing back into the earth. Desert miracle, Wade explained as he helped Lillian dismount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when she met his eyes, something passed between them, a spark of recognition, perhaps, or understanding. He cleared his throat and stepped back. We'll rest here an hour, no more. Need to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. While Hannah led the horses to drink, Wade unpacked some provisions: jerky, hardtack, and dried apples. It was simple fare but welcome to the sisters who hadn't eaten since the previous evening. How far is Silver Creek? Lillian asked, settling on a sun-warmed rock and stretching her legs. 3 days if we push hard, Wade replied, sitting across from her and offering her first choice of the food. Maybe 4 with the extra rider. Depends on whether we're followed. You think we will be? Wade's expression turned grim. Preacher Holloway isn't just a man of the church. He's got money invested in several businesses in town, including Miss Clara's. Men like that don't take kindly to losing what they consider their property. We aren't his property, Lillian said fiercely. No, madam, you certainly aren't. Wade's smile returned briefly. But that doesn't mean he won't come looking, which is why we need to stay alert and keep moving. As they ate, Wade shared more about Silver Creek, a growing settlement built around both silver mining and cattle ranching. Unlike Las Vegas, it had a proper sheriff and circuit judge who kept order. It's not perfect, Wade admitted, but it's a place where 2 women with skills might find honest work. The hotel owner, Mrs. Garcia, is always looking for help, and she doesn't tolerate nonsense from her patrons. You seem to know the town well, Hannah observed, rejoining them with the horses properly watered. Wade shrugged. Passed through a few times. The cattle drive I mentioned leaves from there in about 2 weeks. Pays good money for experienced hands. As they prepared to continue their journey, Lillian noticed Wade wincing slightly as he lifted his saddle. You're injured, she said. Old wound, he dismissed. Acts up sometimes when I've been in the saddle too long. Let me see. The words came automatically. She tended her father through many such injuries. Wade hesitated, then relented, pulling aside his jacket to reveal a poorly healed gash along his side. Ran into some trouble with rustlers last month. Doctor and Piach stitched me up, but I may have pushed too hard getting back on the trail. Lillian examined the wound with clinical detachment. It's inflamed. You need to clean it properly before infection sets in. She looked up at him. Tonight when we camp, I'll tend to it. I have some knowledge of medicinal plants we can gather along the way. Much obliged, Wade said, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. It seems I was fortunate to encounter you ladies after all. As they mounted up to continue their journey, Hannah still on Pepper, Lillian again sharing Rusty with Wade, a new understanding existed between them. They weren't simply strangers thrown together by circumstance any longer. Each had something to offer the other, forming the tentative beginnings of trust. The afternoon stretched long as they rode south through increasingly rugged terrain. Wade chose their path carefully, keeping to rocky ground where possible to minimize tracks. Occasionally, he would halt and listen, his body tense before continuing. Though he said nothing to alarm them, Lillian sensed his vigilance. "You think they're following," she said quietly as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. "Just being cautious," Wade replied, but his hand had dropped to the revolver at his hip more than once. By dusk, they'd reached a sheltered canyon with a small seep spring trickling down one wall. Wade declared it a suitable campsite, hidden from view and with water for the horses. "No fire tonight," he said as he helped Hannah and then Lillian dismount. "Can't risk the smoke being spotted." They worked together efficiently setting up camp. Hannah tended the horses while Lillian organized their meager provisions. Wade secured the perimeter, moving stones to create a natural alarm system should anyone approach. As night fell, the desert temperature dropped sharply. With no fire for warmth, the sisters huddled together beneath one of Wade's blankets while he spread his bedroll a respectful distance away. "Try to get some sleep," he told them. "I'll take first watch." "Wake me for second watch," Lillian insisted. "You need rest too, especially with that wound." Wade looked like he might argue but nodded. 3 hours, then." Hannah was asleep within minutes, the exhaustion of their ordeal finally catching up to her. Lillian, however, remained awake, watching Wade's silhouette against the star-filled sky. "You should rest," he said softly, noticing her vigilance. "I will," she hesitated. "Mr. Porter, thank you for helping us." His profile turned toward her. "Wade, if we're going to be traveling together, you might as well use my given name." "Wade," she repeated, testing the familiarity. "Then you must call me Lillian, Lillian." The way he said it, like he was committing it to memory, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "It suits you. Strong name for a strong woman." "I don't feel very strong," she admitted. "Just fortunate that you happened to be at the creek this morning." "Maybe it wasn't chance," Wade suggested. "My mother always said God puts people in our path for a reason." "Do you believe that?" He was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I'd like to. Makes the hard parts of life easier to bear if they're leading somewhere meaningful." The vulnerability in his voice touched something in Lillian that had been closed off since her parents' deaths. "My father used to say something similar, that our trials forge us into the people we're meant to become." Sounds like a wise man. He was. Grief tightened her throat. "I miss him." "And my mother." Wade's silhouette nodded. "That kind of missing doesn't go away, just gets more bearable with time. You speak from experience." "Lost my parents young. Raised by my grandmother until she passed when I was 16. Been on my own since then." The simple recitation of facts carried undercurrents of old pain. Lillian wanted to offer comfort but wasn't sure how. Instead, she asked, "Is that why you help strangers? Because you know what it's like to be alone?" Wade turned to look at her fully, his features barely visible in the starlight. "Maybe. Or maybe I just couldn't ride past 2 women clearly in trouble. Either way, I'm glad I stopped." Their conversation drifted into comfortable silence. Eventually, Lillian's eyes grew heavy, and she gave in to exhaustion, sleeping more soundly than she had in months despite the hard ground beneath her. She woke to Wade's gentle touch on her shoulder. "Your watch," he whispered, careful not to disturb Hannah. Sitting up, Lillian noticed he'd moved his bedroll closer, presumably for easier transition of watch duties. "Any trouble?" "All quiet," he assured her. "If you hear anything unusual, wake me immediately." He handed her his revolver. "You know how to use this." "My father taught me," she confirmed, checking that it was loaded. Wade nodded, satisfied, and settled onto his bedroll. Within minutes, his breathing deepened, though Lillian suspected he remained alert even in sleep, a necessary survival skill in the territories. The night passed slowly. Sitting with her back against a boulder, Lillian watched the stars wheel overhead and contemplated the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she'd been trapped in a living nightmare, her options dwindling by the hour. Now she was in the desert with a man she barely knew, fleeing toward an uncertain future, yet feeling more hope than she had in months. She glanced at Wade's sleeping form. He was an enigma, a cowboy with educated speech, a loner who'd unhesitatingly offered help to strangers, a man whose calloused hands suggested hard work, yet touched her with unexpected gentleness. Trust didn't come easily to Lillian anymore, but Wade Porter had earned at least the beginning of it. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light stretching across the eastern sky. Lillian watched the desert transform from silver-shadowed mystery to golden clarity, revealing the stark beauty that had been hidden by darkness. She was so absorbed in the spectacle that she startled when Wade spoke from beside her. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" he said softly, settling next to her on the boulder. "Desert sunrise makes a man feel small and significant all at once. How long have you been awake?" she asked, embarrassed that she hadn't noticed him stirring. "Long enough to appreciate that you're a vigilant watchkeeper." He smiled, the early light catching the amber flecks in his eyes. "And that you appreciate beauty where others might see only emptiness." The observation was too perceptive, making Lillian feel exposed. She changed the subject. "We should check your wound before we move on." Wade nodded, accepting her deflection without comment. "There's a small basin of water I collected from the seep last night." As Hannah continued sleeping, Lillian gathered the medicinal plants she'd noticed the previous day: desert sage and creosote bush. Using a stone, she ground them into a poultice while Wade carefully removed his shirt. In the clear morning light, Lillian could see that the wound was worse than she'd initially thought: a jagged gash about 6 inches long that curved along his ribs. The skin around it was red and warm to the touch, signaling infection. "This will hurt," she warned, cleaning the wound with water and a strip of fabric torn from her petticoat. Wade didn't flinch, though she knew the process must be painful. Instead, he watched her work, his gaze steady and curious. "Where did you learn this?" "My mother was known for her healing skills," Lillian explained, carefully applying the poultice. "She taught me which plants could help and which could harm. My father called it her magic." "And what did your mother call it?" Lillian smiled at the memory. "She said it wasn't magic at all, just paying attention to what God had already provided." When she finished, Wade helped her bind the poultice in place with strips of clean fabric. His fingers brushed against hers during the process, sending unexpected warmth through her hands. "Thank you," he said when she was done. "Feels better already." Hannah stirred then, waking to find them sitting close together. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she made no comment as she joined them for a quick breakfast of jerky and the last of Wade's dried apples. "We should reach Thompson's Creek by midday," Wade told them as they prepared to depart. "Small trading post there where we can resupply. Owner's a good man who minds his own business." "Will it be safe?" Hannah asked, voicing the concern Lillian shared. "Safe enough. It's off the main trails, mostly used by prospectors and hunters." Wade tightened Rusty's saddle girth. "But we'll need to be cautious. News travels even in remote places." This time, Wade suggested that Lillian ride Pepper while he and Hannah shared Rusty. Gives the horses a chance to carry different weights, he explained, though Lillian suspected he was also being considerate of their comfort. As they rode, the landscape grew increasingly beautiful, mesas rising in the distance, unexpected patches of wildflowers dotting the rocky terrain, hawks circling lazily overhead. Despite the circumstances of their flight, Lillian found herself appreciating the freedom of the open country in a way she never had before. "You're smiling," Wade observed, bringing his horse alongside hers during a stretch of wider trail. Hannah had fallen into light slumber against his back, exhausted from their early start. "Am I?" Lillian touched her lips, surprised. "I suppose I am. It's been a while." "Suits you," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "What will you do in Silver Creek, if you don't mind my asking?" The question sobered her. "Find work, I hope. Save enough to perhaps move on to somewhere bigger, Denver or San Francisco, somewhere Hannah might continue her education. She's scholarly, very. Top of her class before." Lillian trailed off. "Before everything changed." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Silver Creek has a small school. New teacher arrived last month, young woman from back east. Hannah might find opportunity there." "And what about you?" Lillian asked. "After your cattle drive, where will you go?" He shrugged, the movement careful so as not to disturb Hannah. "Wherever the work takes me, I suppose. Been thinking about California, maybe Oregon. Heard there's good land to be had for those willing to work it." "You want to be a farmer, not a cowboy?" The question seemed to surprise him. "My father had a small ranch in Colorado before he died. Always thought I might like to have something similar someday. Place of my own, few head of cattle, good horses." His gaze drifted to the horizon. Somewhere to build a life rather than just pass through. The simple dream resonated with Lillian. Despite growing up in town, she'd always yearned for a place where she could see the stars at night, grow her own food, live by the rhythm of seasons rather than society's expectations. "It's a good dream," she said softly. Wade's eyes returned to hers, something unspoken passing between them. Before he could respond, however, Hannah stirred and sat up straighter. "Is that smoke?" she asked, pointing to a thin gray column rising in the distance. Wade's expression sharpened. "Thompson's Creek." "We're closer than I thought," he frowned. "But that's too much smoke for normal operations." Urging the horses to a small rise, they could see the trading post below, or what remained of it. The main building was ablaze, black smoke billowing into the clear sky. "Stay here," Wade instructed, dismounting and handing Rusty's reins to Hannah. "I need to see what happened." "It could be a trap," Lillian warned, sliding off Pepper to join him. "Which is why you're staying with the horses," Wade replied firmly. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, or if you see anyone approaching who isn't me, take the horses and ride northeast toward those hills." He pointed to a distant ridge. "There's a line shack about 5 miles beyond them. Hunters use it. You'll find basic supplies there." The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Lillian nodded reluctantly, watching as Wade drew his revolver and made his way cautiously down the slope, using boulders and scrub brush for cover as he approached the burning building. The minutes crawled by as the sisters waited, scanning the horizon for any sign of threat. Hannah clutched Lillian's hand, her face pale with renewed fear. "You trust him?" she whispered. Lillian hesitated only briefly. "Yes, I do." "So do I," Hannah admitted. "He reminds me of Father, the way he listens before he speaks." The comparison startled Lillian, but she realized it was apt. Wade possessed the same quiet strength and consideration that had defined their father. Relief flooded through her when Wade finally emerged from the smoke, making his way quickly back up the slope. His expression was grim, his clothes smudged with soot. "What happened?" Lillian asked as he reached them. "Raiders," Wade replied, wiping his face with a bandana. Hit the place probably yesterday. Thompson and his son are dead. The flat delivery couldn't disguise the anger in his voice. They took what supplies they could carry and burned the rest. Raiders, like Indians? Hannah asked anxiously. Wade shook his head. White men from the tracks. 6, maybe 7 of them, and they were asking about 2 women and a stolen dagger. Lillian's blood ran cold. Holloway sent them. Seems likely. Wade looked back at the burning building. I gave Thompson and his boy what burial I could. Shouldn't have left them for the scavengers. The simple act of humanity in the midst of violence touched Lillian deeply. Most men would have assessed the danger and moved on without concerning themselves with the dead. What do we do now? She asked as Wade mounted Rusty behind Hannah. Change course, he decided. We'll head southeast toward the Colorado River. Longer route to Silver Creek, but less likely to cross paths with Holloway's men. They'll expect us to continue south. As they rode away from Thompson's Creek, Lillian couldn't shake the sick feeling in her stomach. Men had died because of her flight from the preacher. The violence she'd hoped to escape was following them, threatening anyone who crossed their path. It's not your fault, Wade said, reading her expression. Men like Holloway spread destruction wherever they go. You're just trying to survive it. His words offered little comfort as they pushed their horses harder, taking a winding path through increasingly rugged terrain. By late afternoon, they'd reached a deep canyon where a small stream provided water and shelter from the relentless sun. We'll rest here until dusk, Wade decided. Too exposed to travel during daylight now that we know they're actively tracking us. While the horses drank, Lillian changed Wade's bandage, relieved to see the poultice had reduced some of the inflammation. Hannah gathered what edible plants she could find to supplement their dwindling provisions. How are they tracking us so effectively? Lillian asked as she worked. We've been careful to hide our trail. Wade winced slightly as she tightened the fresh binding. That dagger you took is more valuable than you realized. Holloway claims it's a family heirloom, but word is he won it in a high-stakes game in Santa Fe. Man would rather lose his soul than that blade. I should have left it, Lillian said, reaching for the dagger at her waist. Wade's hand covered hers, stopping her. No, you did what was necessary to escape. Never apologize for that. His touch lingered, warm and reassuring. When Lillian looked up, she found his face closer than expected, his eyes intent on hers. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, and more surprising, she realized she wanted him to. The moment broke when Hannah returned with a handful of prickly pear fruit. Look what I found, she announced, oblivious to the tension she'd interrupted. Wade released Lillian's hand and stepped back, his expression unreadable as he helped Hannah prepare the fruit. The 3 ate in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the canyon shadows lengthened. When dusk finally arrived, they continued their journey, navigating by starlight through the desert night. Wade's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as he led them along hidden game trails and dry washes where their tracks would be quickly erased by wind. How much further to the river? Hannah asked sometime after midnight, her voice heavy with fatigue. Should reach it by dawn if we maintain this pace, Wade replied. There's a ferry crossing operated by an old mountain man named Brigham. If we're lucky, he'll take us across before Holloway's men catch up. Lillian shifted uncomfortably on Pepper's back. Hours in the saddle had left her sore, and worry had knotted her muscles tight. And if we're not lucky, Wade's silhouette straightened. Then I'll make sure you and Hannah get away safely. The simple declaration carried such conviction that Lillian couldn't doubt his sincerity. In the short time they'd known him, Wade Porter had proven himself a man of his word and, perhaps more importantly, a man of principle. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Dawn found them at the edge of a plateau, overlooking the Colorado River, a ribbon of silver cutting through the red rock landscape. In the early light, they could see a crude ferry dock on the near shore and a small cabin built into the cliff face above it. "Brigham's place," Wade confirmed, pointing to thin smoke rising from a stone chimney. "Let's hope he's in a hospitable mood." As they descended the steep trail to the river, Lillian marveled at the dramatic change in scenery. After days in the Nevada desert, the river's lush banks seemed almost miraculous, cottonwoods and willows creating pools of shade, wildflowers dotting the sandy soil, birds calling from hidden perches. When they reached the cabin, an old man emerged, rifle in hand. His beard reached nearly to his waist, and his weathered face suggested decades spent in the harsh elements. "State your business," he called, the rifle not quite pointed at them but ready to be raised if necessary. "Looking to cross Brigham," Wade replied, dismounting slowly with his hands visible. "Been a few years. Not sure if you remember me, Wade Porter. Came through with Jack Collins back in '73. The old man squinted, then lowered his rifle slightly. "The young fella who saved my mule from that mountain lion. Thought you looked familiar." His gaze shifted to the sisters. "Don't recall these two, though." "Lillian and Hannah Dawson," Wade introduced them. "We're headed to Silver Creek, hoping to avoid some trouble on the main trails." Brigham's expression sharpened. "Wouldn't happen to be the same trouble that brought 4 unsavory types through here yesterday asking about 2 women and a fancy dagger, would it?" Lillian's heart sank. Wade's hand moved instinctively toward his revolver. "Easy," Brigham said, noticing the movement. "I didn't tell them nothing. Don't care for men who hunt women, whatever their reasons." He spat into the dirt. "Sent them upriver, told them the ferry was broken. They're probably halfway to the next crossing by now." Relief washed over Lillian. "Thank you." Brigham nodded. "Crossing's $2 silver per head, including horses, or equivalent in trade." Wade reached into his pocket and withdrew a handful of coins, counting out the required amount. "Fair price." "Includes breakfast," Brigham added, his tone softening slightly. "You all look like you could use a hot meal before crossing." Inside Brigham's cabin, they were served a surprisingly hearty breakfast of cornmeal mush, dried venison, and strong coffee. As they ate, the old ferryman shared what he knew about Holloway's men. "Mean-looking bunch," he said, refilling their cups. "Leader was a tall fella with a scar down his cheek. Called himself bishop, though I doubt he's ever seen the inside of a church except to rob it." "How many?" Wade asked. "4 that I saw." But they mentioned others watching the main trail south. Brigham glanced at Lillian. "Whatever you took from them, they want it back badly." Lillian's hand moved to the dagger at her waist. "It wasn't theirs to begin with." The old man grunted. "Possession's 9/10 out here, girl." "But I reckon you had your reasons." He turned to Wade. "Once I get you across, head southeast through Apache territory. Most white men avoid it, which makes it your safest route now." "Apache territory," Hannah repeated nervously. "Don't worry," Brigham assured her. "Current chief trades with me regular. Fair man, unlike most I've dealt with, red or white. If you're respectful and offer small gifts, they'll likely let you pass unmolested." After breakfast, they helped Brigham load the horses onto his ferry, little more than a sturdy raft with guide ropes stretching across the river. The crossing took nearly an hour, with Brigham working the ropes while Wade helped pole them across the swift current. On the far shore, they bid the old ferryman farewell. "Watch yourselves," he called as they mounted up. "And if you make it to Silver Creek, tell Maggie at the hotel that her old friend Brigham says she still owes him that dance she promised." Wade laughed, the sound brightening his tired face. "Will do." As they rowed away from the river into unfamiliar territory, Lillian found herself studying Wade's profile. In just 3 days, this man had risked his life for them, shared his provisions, and now was leading them through dangerous country, all without asking anything in return. Such selflessness seemed almost unbelievable in a world that had shown Lillian little but cruelty since her parents' deaths. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked when they paused to water the horses at a small spring. "Truly." Wade looked surprised by the direct question. "I told you. You said you couldn't ride past women in trouble," Lillian interrupted. "But that was before you knew about Holloway's men, before Thompson's Creek, before risking Apache territory. You could have left us at the ferry crossing with enough provisions to continue on our own." For a long moment, Wade was silent, absently running his fingers through Rusty's mane. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. "My sister was 16 when a man like Holloway took an interest in her. Respected businessman in our town, elder in the church. No one questioned when he offered her a position in his household after our parents died." His jaw tightened. "By the time I realized what was happening, she was broken, took her own life the following spring." The raw pain in his voice made Lillian's throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." "I was 19, full of rage. Confronted him publicly, but he had too many friends in high places. Called me a grieving brother, making wild accusations." Wade's eyes met hers, haunted by old guilt. "I should have done more to protect her. Failed at that. But when I saw you and Hannah at the creek, running from a so-called man of God." He shook his head. "Maybe it's a chance to make something right that can never truly be made right." Hannah had wandered a short distance away, giving them privacy, but now she returned, her expression solemn. "What was your sister's name?" she asked, having overheard at least part of the conversation. "Elizabeth," Wade replied, the name clearly precious to him. "She loved wildflowers, used to fill our home with them every spring." Hannah reached into her pocket and withdrew a small desert lily she'd picked near the spring. With simple ceremony, she placed it in Wade's hand. "For Elizabeth," she said, "and thank you for protecting us when you couldn't protect her." The gesture visibly moved Wade. He stared at the delicate flower for a long moment before carefully tucking it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. The moment crystallized something between the three of them, a bond forged in shared pain and unexpected kindness. They weren't merely traveling companions anymore. They were something more, though Lillian wasn't yet ready to name what that might be. As they continued their journey through increasingly rugged terrain, Lillian found herself watching Wade with new understanding. His protectiveness wasn't just about duty or principle, it was personal, rooted in a loss that had shaped his life. The knowledge didn't diminish his kindness. If anything, it made his willingness to help them even more meaningful. They traveled cautiously through the afternoon, Wade constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of either Holloway's men or Apache scouts. By evening, they'd reached a sheltered valley with a small stream running through it, an ideal camping spot with good visibility and multiple escape routes if needed. "We'll stop here for the night," Wade decided. "Need to let the horses rest properly, and we could all use some sleep." As they made camp, a new efficiency marked their interactions. Hannah tended the horses with growing confidence while Lillian gathered firewood and Wade scouted the perimeter. When he returned, Wade surprised them by producing several rabbits he'd snared. "Fresh meat tonight," he announced, setting about preparing them with practiced skill. Over their first hot meal in days, the mood lightened considerably. Wade shared stories of his travels that had Hannah laughing, and Lillian found herself joining in, the weight of constant fear temporarily lifting. "What was Las Vegas like when you lived there?" Hannah asked, accepting a second helping of rabbit stew. Before we arrived, I mean. Wade considered the question. Growing town. Attracts all types: ranchers, miners, gamblers, people looking for a fresh start. Some find it, some don't. He glanced at Lillian. Town needs good people to balance the others. Shame you had to leave. We had no choice, Lillian replied. I know. Wade's expression softened. But Silver Creek might offer what Las Vegas couldn't: a real community, not just a collection of people passing through. Is that why you're returning there? Hannah asked innocently. For community, something flickered in Wade's eyes. Partly. The cattle drive pays well, and I've worked with the trail boss before. Good man, fair wages. And after? Lillian found herself asking. Will you continue north as you planned? Wade set down his tin plate, his gaze meeting hers across the small fire. Plans can change, he said simply, the implication hanging in the air between them. That night, as they settled into their bedrolls beneath the star-filled sky, Lillian lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep. Wade's words echoed in her mind. Plans can change. Was he suggesting he might stay in Silver Creek? And if so, was it for her and Hannah, or simply because circumstances had altered his course? More troubling was her own reaction to the possibility. In less than a week, Wade Porter had become important to her in ways she hadn't thought possible after everything she'd endured. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Trust was dangerous, attachment even more so. Yet as she finally drifted toward sleep, Lillian couldn't deny the truth: somewhere between the creek where they'd first met and this quiet valley, Wade had become more than their rescuer. He'd become essential. The next morning brought new tension as they prepared to enter what Brigham had called Apache territory. Wade distributed small gifts he'd purchased at various trading posts: tobacco, colorful beads, mirror items that might help smooth their passage if they encountered the native inhabitants. Remember, he instructed as they mounted up, if we meet Apache, let me do the talking. Stay calm, make no sudden movements, and don't stare directly at them. It's considered aggressive. They traveled through stunning landscape, towering red rock formations, hidden canyons, and unexpected oases of green amidst the arid terrain. By midday, Wade's vigilance had increased noticeably. He frequently halted their progress to examine subtle signs in the landscape that were invisible to Lillian and Hannah. We're being watched, he said quietly after one such stop. Have been for the past hour. Lillian fought the urge to scan their surroundings. What do we do? Continue at the same pace. Show we're passing through peacefully, not hunting or looking for trouble. Wade adjusted his hat. When they decide to make themselves known, we'll offer gifts and explain our journey. They rode another mile before the Apache revealed themselves, 4 warriors on horseback appearing suddenly on a ridge ahead, as if materializing from the rock itself. Their faces were painted for war, their expressions impassive as they assessed the intruders. Wade immediately halted their party and raised his empty hand in greeting. One warrior, clearly the leader, urged his horse forward, stopping a respectful distance away. What followed was a tense exchange, with Wade using a combination of simple Spanish, rudimentary Apache words, and hand gestures to communicate. Lillian watched in amazement as he somehow conveyed their situation, offering the gifts with proper ceremony and respect. After what seemed an eternity, the Apache leader nodded and spoke rapidly to his companions. 2 warriors disappeared back over the ridge while the leader and one other remained. What's happening? Hannah whispered nervously. They're escorting us through their territory, Wade explained, relief evident in his voice. As a gesture of goodwill, they're also going to check if anyone's following us. You speak their language? Lillian asked, impressed. Wade shook his head. Just enough to avoid getting killed. Spent a season working alongside some Apache scouts for the Army. Learned to respect their ways. Under escort, they traveled deeper into Apache land. The warriors maintained a certain distance but remained vigilant, occasionally communicating with Wade through gestures or brief exchanges. By late afternoon, they'd reached a high plateau overlooking a vast expanse of desert stretching toward distant mountains. The Apache leader pointed southeast, speaking at length to Wade before offering a small leather pouch. "What did he say?" Lillian asked when the warriors finally departed, melting back into the landscape as mysteriously as they'd appeared. Wade opened the pouch, revealing dried herbs and roots. "He says we should continue southeast for 2 days to reach your place of metal and cattle Silver Creek. The herbs are for my wound." He looked genuinely touched by the gesture. He also said they found tracks of 6 men following our old trail. The Apache diverted them north with false signs. "They're helping us?" Hannah asked, surprised. "The Apache have no love for men who hunt women," Wade explained. "And it seems our preacher friend has made enemies beyond Las Vegas. The leader recognized my description of the dagger, said it once belonged to a great Apache chief before being stolen by white traders." Lillian withdrew the dagger from her waist, examining the silver cross on its hilt with new understanding. No wonder Holloway values it so highly. It's not just valuable, it's a symbol of conquest. "All the more reason to keep it from him," Wade said firmly. "Come on. We have a few more hours of daylight to put distance between us and any pursuers." They traveled until dusk, making camp in a protected hollow where a spring provided fresh water. That night, Lillian insisted on treating Wade's wound with both her poultice and the Apache herbs. As she worked, their conversation flowed more easily than before, touching on childhood memories, favorite books, and dreams deferred by circumstance. "I always wanted to see the ocean," Lillian confessed as she finished bandaging his side. "My father promised to take us to California someday." Wade's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "You still can. Silver Creek isn't the end of your journey, Lillian, just a safe place to catch your breath before deciding what comes next." His words reminded her that their time together had a natural end point, Silver Creek, where their paths might diverge. The thought brought an unexpected ache. "And what about you?" she asked, not moving her hand from beneath his. "What comes after Silver Creek for Wade Porter?" In the firelight, his expression was impossible to read, but his voice carried an emotion she hadn't heard before. "That depends." "On what?" His fingers intertwined with hers, the gesture both question and answer. "On whether I have reason to stay." Lillian's heart quickened. Before she could respond, Hannah returned from watering the horses, and the moment passed, leaving Lillian's question unanswered but a new possibility humming between them. The following day brought both progress and peril. By noon, they'd left Apache territory behind, entering rolling grassland that Wade said marked the approach to Silver Creek. The change in landscape lifted their spirits after days in the desert. The green expanse seemed to promise safety and civilization ahead. Their optimism was short-lived. As they crested a hill overlooking a broad valley, Wade suddenly reined in his horse, his posture tense. "Riders," he said, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. "Coming fast from the west." Shading her eyes, Lillian could make out several mounted figures moving purposefully across the valley floor. "Holloway's men. Can't tell from here, but we can't risk it." Wade scanned their surroundings, making a quick decision. "There's a box canyon about 2 miles east. Used to be a small ranch there before Apache raids drove the settlers out. We can take shelter, let them pass." They rode hard for the canyon, pushing the tired horses to their limit. When they reached the abandoned ranch, they found it much as Wade had described: a small cabin with collapsed roof, a spring-fed pond, and the remains of corrals now overgrown with vegetation. "Get inside," Wade instructed, helping Hannah dismount. "Take the horses around back where they can't be seen from the canyon entrance." As Lillian led the horses to a sheltered area behind the cabin, Wade positioned himself on a rocky outcrop with a clear view of their back trail. His rifle rested easily in his hands, his expression grim but determined. "Are they following us?" Lillian asked when she returned. "Changed course when we did," Wade confirmed. "They'll be here within the hour." Fear clutched at Lillian's throat. How many? 5 that I could see. The odds weren't in their favor. Wade was skilled and determined, but he was still recovering from his wound and they were outnumbered. "We should run," Hannah said, her face pale. "Continue east while we can." Wade shook his head. "Open terrain that way. They'd spot us immediately, run us down before we covered a mile." He checked his rifle's action, ensuring it was ready. "This canyon has only one entrance. Easier to defend." "Defend?" Lillian echoed. "Wade, you can't possibly think to fight 5 armed men alone." His eyes met hers, steady and resolute. "I don't intend to fight unless necessary. First, we'll try to hide. If that fails, we'll try to reason with them. Fighting is the last resort." "And if it comes to that," she pressed. Wade's expression softened slightly. "Then I'll make sure you and Hannah have time to escape out the back of the canyon. There's a game trail that leads up to the ridge. Follow it east until you reach the Silver Creek Road." The implication was clear: he would sacrifice himself if necessary to ensure their safety. The realization struck Lillian with physical force. "No," she said firmly. "We stay together." "Lillian, we stay together," she repeated, her voice brooking no argument. "We've come this far as a group. We'll face whatever comes the same way." Wade studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but you and Hannah stay inside the cabin. It's not much cover, but better than nothing." As they prepared for the confrontation, Lillian retrieved the dagger that had started their journey. "Take it," she said, offering it to Wade. "If they want it so badly, perhaps we can use it to negotiate." Wade shook his head. "Keep it. Might come in handy if—" He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "Whatever happens, Lillian, I want you to know that meeting you and Hannah has been—" "Don't," she interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't talk as if this is the end." A small smile touched his lips. "Just wanted to say it's been the best few days I've had in a long time, despite the circumstances." Before Lillian could respond, Hannah called out from her position near the cabin entrance. "They're coming." Wade immediately moved to a defensive position, motioning for the sisters to take cover inside the cabin. Through gaps in the deteriorating walls, they could see 5 riders entering the canyon at a cautious pace, weapons drawn. "That's them," Lillian whispered, recognizing the tall figure in front as the man Brigham had described: Bishop, with the distinctive scar down his cheek. Wade raised his rifle, aiming carefully. "Stay quiet. Maybe they'll just check the canyon entrance and move on." But the riders continued forward, spreading out as they approached the cabin. Their leader signaled for 2 men to circle around back directly toward where the horses were hidden. "They know we're here," Wade muttered. He stood suddenly, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. The riders immediately halted, weapons trained on Wade's position. The leader, Bishop, urged his horse forward a few steps. "Well now, what have we here?" he drawled, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "A lone cowboy playing hero." His eyes scanned the area, stopping on the cabin. "Why don't you ladies come on out? No need for anyone to get hurt over a simple misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Wade replied coldly, "is you thinking I'll let you take these women anywhere." Bishop's laugh was unpleasant. "Brave talk from a man outnumbered 5-1. Preacher Holloway just wants his property returned. Hand over the dagger and the women, and you can ride away intact." Inside the cabin, Lillian clutched the dagger, her mind racing. These men wouldn't stop at retrieving the blade they'd been sent to bring her and Hannah back to Holloway, and they wouldn't be gentle about it. "That's not going to happen," Wade called back. "The women are under my protection, and the dagger isn't Holloway's to claim. It was stolen from the Apache long before he got his hands on it." Bishop's expression darkened. "I'm not interested in history lessons, cowboy. My orders are clear." He gestured to his men, who began to spread out further, seeking angles of attack. Wade's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger. Last chance to ride away. The tension stretched between them, each side measuring the other's resolve. Then, unexpectedly, Hannah stepped from the cabin onto the porch, her hands raised. "Hannah, no!" Lillian cried, lunging after her sister. "I have the dagger," Hannah announced clearly, drawing all eyes to her. "And I'm willing to return it if you'll leave us in peace." Bishop smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Smart girl. Bring it here, and no one needs to get hurt." Wade hadn't lowered his rifle, but his attention was now divided between Bishop and Hannah's vulnerable position. "Get back inside," he ordered tensely. Instead, Hannah took another step forward. "First, your men need to lower their weapons." The boldness of her demand seemed to amuse Bishop. He gestured for his men to lower their guns, though Lillian noticed they kept them ready. "There. Now the dagger, if you please." What happened next unfolded with breathtaking speed. As Hannah pretended to reach for the dagger, a war cry split the air, followed by a volley of arrows that seemed to materialize from the canyon walls. Two of Bishop's men fell immediately, while the others scrambled for cover, firing blindly at unseen attackers. "Apache!" someone shouted as more arrows rained down, precise and deadly. From her position at the cabin entrance, Lillian watched in astonishment as the Apache warriors they'd encountered the previous day descended the canyon walls like shadows, their movements swift and coordinated. Wade seized the opportunity, firing his rifle with deadly accuracy at one of Bishop's remaining men. Within minutes, the battle was decided. Bishop and his surviving man were disarmed and forced to their knees, surrounded by stoic Apache warriors. The leader, the same who had escorted them through tribal lands, approached Wade, exchanging brief words before turning to Bishop. In halting English, the Apache chief addressed the captured man. "You trespass, hunt women, steal from ancestors." He touched the hilt of his own knife meaningfully. "Go back to false preacher. Tell him dagger returned to rightful people. Tell him Apache now watch these friends." He pointed to Wade, Lillian, and Hannah. "They under protection." Bishop's face contorted with rage and fear. "You can't just—" The chief silenced him with a raised hand. "You live because I allow it. Carry message. Do not return." With that, the Apache warriors confiscated the intruders' weapons, leaving them only a single canteen and knife for survival. Under watchful eyes, Bishop and his remaining man mounted their horses and rode from the canyon, their defeat evident in every line of their bodies. When they were gone, the Apache chief turned to Lillian, gesturing for the dagger. With a sense of ceremony, she presented it to him, understanding now its significance. The chief examined the blade, his weathered fingers tracing the symbols etched into the metal beneath the silver cross that Holloway had added. He spoke at length to Wade, who listened attentively before translating. "He says the dagger belonged to his grandfather, a great chief who traded with Spanish explorers. It was stolen during a raid by white settlers 30 years ago. Its return is a powerful sign, a circle completed. The chief nodded, confirming Wade's translation. Then, to everyone's surprise, he pressed the dagger back into Lillian's hands, speaking again to Wade. "He says the dagger has chosen you as its new keeper," Wade explained, looking equally surprised. "That your courage in taking it from a false man proves you worthy to carry it. It's a great honor." Overwhelmed, Lillian bowed her head in acceptance. "Tell him thank you, and thank you for saving our lives." After Wade translated, the chief smiled, the first such expression they'd seen from him. He spoke again, this time more animatedly, gesturing between Wade and Lillian. Wade's face flushed slightly. He says we are well matched, that our spirits recognize each other." His eyes met Lillian's, a question in them that made her heart race. "He's offered us the protection of his people until we reach Silver Creek." The Apache stayed with them through the night, sharing food and stories around a campfire. Though the language barrier remained, understanding flowed through Wade's translations and the universal language of gesture and expression. By morning, Lillian had developed a profound respect for these people. She'd once feared their dignity, their clear principles, their connection to the land. As they prepared to depart, the chief presented them with final gifts: a beautifully tanned deerskin bag for Lillian, a beaded bracelet for Hannah, and for Wade, a medicine pouch to be worn around the neck. "For protection on your journey," Wade translated, visibly moved by the gesture. "And as a reminder that you now have friends among the Apache." With 4 warriors as escorts, they traveled the final day towards Silver Creek without incident. The landscape grew more hospitable as they approached the settlement, rolling grasslands giving way to scattered ranches, and finally the town itself, nestled in a valley with the silver mines visible on distant hillsides. At the town limits, the Apache warriors halted, unwilling to enter a white settlement. Their leader exchanged final words with Wade before the group wheeled their horses and disappeared back into the landscape they knew so intimately. "What did he say?" Hannah asked, watching them go with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Wade's expression was thoughtful. "That we should remember this journey, that sometimes the greatest dangers come wearing familiar faces and the greatest allies from unexpected places." Silver Creek proved to be exactly as Wade had described: a growing settlement with a main street lined with businesses, a church, a school, and the promised hotel run by Mrs. Garcia. As they rode down the street, townsfolk regarded them with curious glances, but no outright hostility, a welcome change after their harrowing journey. At the hotel, Mrs. Garcia, a formidable woman in her 50s with streaks of silver in her black hair, welcomed them warmly, particularly when Wade mentioned Brigham's message about the dance he was still owed. "That old river rat," she laughed, her accent revealing her Mexican heritage. "Tell him he's 20 years too late, but I'll hold a room for him anyway, should he ever venture this far from his precious ferry." She provided the sisters with a comfortable room, and after hearing a carefully edited version of their circumstances, offered them positions at the hotel. Hannah to help with bookkeeping, Lillian to assist with the hotel's small restaurant. "Good help is hard to find," Mrs. Garcia explained. "And women with spirit even harder. You'll do well here if you're willing to work." Wade, meanwhile, confirmed that the cattle drive was still assembling outside town, not due to depart for another 10 days. He took a room at the hotel as well, though he spent most days at the ranch where the herd was gathering, helping with preparations. In the evenings, however, he returned to town, often joining Lillian for walks along Silver Creek itself, the waterway that had given the settlement its name. During these quiet moments, Their connection deepened beyond the bonds forged in danger to something more tender and deliberate. "Will you really go north after the drive?" Lillian asked one evening, a week after their arrival. They were sitting on the creek bank, watching the sunset paint the water with gold and crimson. Wade picked up a flat stone, skipping it across the water's surface. "That depends." "On what?" she pressed, echoing their conversation from days before. This time, Wade turned to face her fully, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "On whether I have something more important to come back to." The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Lillian's heart beat faster as Wade reached for her hand, his touch gentle but certain. "Lillian, I know we've only known each other a short time, but it's been long enough," she interrupted softly. "Long enough to know who you are when it matters most." Wade's eyes searched hers. "And who am I?" "A good man," she replied simply. "The kind my father would have respected, the kind I've come to." She hesitated, then found the courage to continue. "The kind I've come to love." The admission seemed to stun him momentarily before a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "I was afraid to hope," he confessed. "After everything you've been through, I wouldn't blame you for wanting nothing to do with any man." "You're not just any man, Wade Porter." Lillian moved closer, emboldened by the warmth in his eyes. "You're the man who saved us at the creek, who protected us through desert and danger, who really sees me not as someone to possess or control, but as an equal." Wade's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "I love you, Lillian Dawson. Didn't expect to find you, wasn't looking for love when I stopped at that creek. But now I can't imagine continuing on without you." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home, gentle yet certain, a promise of protection without possession, of partnership without dominance. Lillian melted into the embrace, all the fear and tension of recent weeks dissolving in the warmth of genuine affection. They returned to the hotel hand in hand, their decision made without need for further words. In the lobby, they found Hannah deep in conversation with the young schoolteacher Mary Williams, a spirited woman from Boston who had already taken Hannah under her wing, encouraging her academic interests. "There you are," Hannah called, her face alight with excitement. "Miss Williams says I can assist in her classroom if Mrs. Garcia can spare me during school hours. Imagine, Lil, I might be a teacher someday." Seeing her sister so animated, so full of hope for the future, confirmed what Lillian already knew: Silver Creek wasn't just a temporary haven. It could be home. Later that night, after Hannah had fallen asleep, Lillian stood at their window overlooking the main street. The town was mostly quiet, a few lamps still glowing in windows, stars brilliant overhead. So different from Las Vegas with its constant activity, its undercurrent of desperation. Here, there was purpose, community, the possibility of building something lasting. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found Wade standing there, his expression serious. "Is something wrong?" she asked, stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind her to avoid waking Hannah. Wade shook his head. "Just couldn't sleep without telling you what I've decided. About the cattle drive, about everything." He took her hands in his. "I'm going on the drive because I gave my word and need the money. But I'll be coming back, Lillian. And when I do, I want to build something here not just for myself but for us. If you'll have me." Emotion tightened Lillian's throat. "What are you saying, Wade?" His smile was tender, his voice steady. "I'm saying that I love you, and if you'll give me a few months to earn a proper stake, I'd like to marry you. Build a small ranch outside town where we can see the stars at night. Give Hannah a stable home while she pursues her education. Start a family of our own if that's what you want." It was everything Lillian had never dared hope for after the darkness of recent months: safety, stability, love freely given and received. Yes, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. To all of it, yes. The cattle drive departed 3 days later, a long procession of men and beasts heading toward California's fertile valleys. Wade rode at the front beside the trail boss, turning once to lift his hat in farewell to Lillian and Hannah, who watched from in front of the hotel. "He'll come back," Hannah said confidently, squeezing her sister's hand. "He's not like other men." "No," Lillian agreed, touching the Apache dagger she still carried, now a symbol of her journey to freedom rather than her desperate flight. "He certainly isn't." The weeks of Wade's absence passed in a rhythm of work and growing connection to Silver Creek. Mrs. Garcia proved to be not just an employer but a mentor, teaching Lillian to manage the restaurant with increasing authority. Hannah divided her time between the hotel's books and Miss Williams' classroom, blossoming in an environment that valued her intelligence. Letters arrived from Wade when possible, carried by riders traveling between California and the territories. His words, though simply expressed, conveyed his deepening commitment and his plans for their future land he'd scouted before leaving, ideas for their ranch, his eagerness to return. By the time autumn painted the surrounding hills with gold and crimson, Lillian had saved enough from her wages to purchase fabric for a proper wedding dress. Hannah insisted on helping with the sewing, the sisters spending evenings by lamplight creating something beautiful from simple materials, much as they were building new lives from the ashes of the old. It was on such an evening, with the first snowflakes of winter drifting past their window, that hoofbeats on the street below drew their attention. Lillian's heart quickened at the sight of a lone rider dismounting before the hotel, tall, broad-shouldered, instantly recognizable even bundled against the cold. She flew down the stairs, heedless of propriety, reaching the lobby just as Wade stepped through the door, bringing the scent of snow and open spaces with him. He looked leaner, more weathered than when he'd left, but his eyes lit with the same warmth when they found her. "You're early," was all she could manage, happiness making coherent thought impossible. Wade crossed the space between them in 3 strides, gathering her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the floor. "Couldn't stay away another day," he murmured against her hair. "The drive ended well. Got a good price for the cattle, enough to buy that land I wrote about and then some." Their reunion drew smiles from hotel guests and a knowing look from Mrs. Garcia, who discreetly ushered others away to give them privacy. Hannah appeared at the top of the stairs, her delighted exclamation drawing Wade's attention. "There she is," he called, releasing Lillian just long enough to embrace her sister as well. "How's the schoolroom treating you?" "Wonderfully. Miss Williams says I have a natural gift for teaching." Hannah beamed. "And wait until you see the wedding dress we're making. Lillian looks like an angel in it." Wade's gaze returned to Lillian, his expression softening. "I don't doubt it for a second." That night, as snow continued to fall, transforming Silver Creek into a wonderland of white, the 3 shared a celebratory dinner in the hotel restaurant. Wade spoke of his journey, the challenges and triumphs of the trail, while Lillian and Hannah updated him on town happenings, including the news that Preacher Holloway had been removed from his position in Las Vegas after accusations from other women had finally been believed. "Justice finds its way eventually," Wade remarked, his hand covering Lillian's on the table, "though sometimes it needs a little help." The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, transformed by Mrs. Garcia and Hannah's efforts into a haven of evergreen boughs and candles. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, having embraced the sisters and Wade as their own. Even old Brigham made the journey from his ferry, grumbling good-naturedly about civilization, but dancing more energetically than men half his age at the reception, especially during his long-promised dance with Mrs. Garcia. Most surprising was the appearance of 3 Apache riders the morning of the wedding, led by the chief who had helped them on their journey. They brought gifts, exquisitely tanned hides, beadwork, and herbs along with their blessing for the union. "He says the circle is complete," Wade translated after speaking with the chief. "That what began in danger ends in harmony as it should be." Standing before the minister in her simple but beautiful dress, Lillian felt the truth of those words. The journey that had begun in desperate flight from one man of the cloth now culminated in joyful commitment, before another, a symmetry that spoke of wounds healed and fear transformed into hope. "I take you, Wade Porter, to be my husband," she vowed, her voice steady despite the emotion filling her heart. "To journey with through all the landscapes of life, to build our home not in any one place but in each other's hearts." Wade's hands were warm around hers as he responded, his own vows simple but profound. "I take you, Lillian Dawson, to be my wife, to protect without confining, to love without possessing, to walk beside rather than ahead or behind. Where you go, I go. Your people are my people. Your dreams, my dreams." The kiss that sealed their vows was a beginning rather than an ending, the start of a partnership forged in danger, but sustained by something far stronger than the circumstances that had brought them together. Spring found them settled on their small ranch outside town, a modest house with room to grow, good pasture for cattle, and a creek running through the property that reminded them daily of their first meeting. Hannah divided her time between their home and town, increasingly independent as she pursued her teaching apprenticeship while still very much part of their family. One evening, as sunset painted the western sky with colors no artist could capture, Lillian found Wade on the porch, watching a small herd of cattle grazing in the distance, the beginning of the dream he'd shared with her by another creek, seemingly a lifetime ago. "Happy?" she asked, settling beside him, her head resting naturally against his shoulder. His arm encircled her waist, hand coming to rest protectively over the gentle swell of her stomach where their child grew a new life that would know only safety and love. "More than I ever thought possible," Wade replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You know, I've been thinking about that morning at the creek, how close I came to riding past without stopping." Lillian smiled, remembering the desperate young woman she'd been, brandishing a stolen dagger at a stranger who would become her husband. "Do you think it was chance? Or something more?" Wade considered the question, his expression thoughtful in the fading light. "Your father said trials forge us into the people we're meant to become. Maybe they also lead us to the people we're meant to find." As night fell over their hard-won sanctuary, Lillian recognized the truth in his words. The preacher's cruelty, their desperate flight, the dangers of the journey, all had been necessary steps on the path that led here, to this moment of perfect contentment beside the man who had met them at the creek with provisions and, unknowingly, with his heart. "Then I'm grateful for every step," she said softly, "even the painful ones. They all led to you." In the growing darkness, their silhouettes merged into one, no longer fugitive and rescuer, but partners in the greatest journey of all. A life built on trust, respect, and love that had proven stronger than any danger the wilderness could present. And if travelers passing by their ranch in years to come noticed the unusual dagger displayed prominently above the fireplace, its silver cross now complemented by Apache beadwork, few knew its full story. But Lillian and Wade remembered, telling their children and eventually their grandchildren about the creek where their paths had crossed, the desert trials that had revealed their true characters, and the love that had transformed two separate journeys into one shared destination. For Lillian, who had once run from a false shepherd with only her sister and a stolen dagger for protection, the greatest miracle wasn't their escape or even their survival. It was finding, in the most unlikely circumstances, a love worth running toward, a love that had turned flight into homecoming and strangers into family.